First off, we have some really exciting content from you, the Dungeon Dudes, that's appearing on D&D Beyond. What is this content?
Well, over the past little while, Kelly and I have been working on a starter introductory adventure for both the 2024 rules and the world of Drakkenheim.
Yeah, we really wanted to kind of tap into some of the things that we didn't get to put in our earlier books, and we really wanted to explore some of the places in Drakkenheim that we felt could be better displayed in adventures.
Yeah, so In Search of the Smuggler's Secrets is actually inspired by some of the events from our original live play campaign that happened in such an extemporaneous manner that when we first wrote Dungeons of Drakkenheim, we were like, how do we capture this moment from the show in a way that other people can explore and have a similar sort of experience where they dive into the contaminated sewers underneath Drakkenheim to try to find another way into the inner part of the city. One of the things that we've always found with writing our adventures is because our books are based on our own campaigns that we played, we always have to find a way to reverse engineer it so that someone else with different characters and a different group can play it for themselves. And
Hmm.
so this was always part of the show that we felt we struggled to capture that little adventure originally.
Well, because in the original show, the players had like already made alliances that most players aren't going to make with like monsters, and then they got the monsters to lead them through the sewers, and then they met more monsters along the way, and hilarity ensues.
Yeah.
But I think that what we ended up doing was a main part of the Drakkenheim campaign is the faction intrigue. So what we did is we stripped out sort of what the players did in our show and more looked at what was fun about the locations they explored, and then we added back in the element of faction intrigue. And instead of making it super open-ended where it's all the factions at play, it really comes down to an introduction into two of the primary factions. And through the adventure, you're working for one and you run into the other, and you kind of get this option presented to you within the adventure of, are you going to keep working for the one that put you on this quest, or are you going to stab them in the back and work for this other faction? And so you actually do, as the players exploring the sewers of Drakkenheim, get to choose one of the two factions that you want to help and in turn make an enemy of the other.
It's a wonderful appetizer for what Drakkenheim has to offer for those that have never explored the world of Drakkenheim, because it can be run as probably a 1 to 3 shot, depending on how fast your group proceeds through the adventure. And also, we had the great opportunity to use the 2024 encounter building rules when building it, so we kind of got to take our first crack at writing an adventure using the 2024 framework as well.
This has to feel a little bit Elseworlds when you have a live play show or you have even a game that becomes an adventure that other people can proceed through and make different choices, or maybe even better choices.
Mm.
But it reminds me actually how Dragonlance, kind of initially started, where the modules were coming out before the book came out. And I started playing through the modules, and we actually played through all of Dragonlance, the modules, and had a very different story because of how the choices we made. So there's something fun, and I mean, hopefully you get to see someone else stream that adventure
Oh
and
yeah.
get a weird sense of like how things can change.
You
Um,
know, I'm actually running a Drakkenheim game at home with like a different group of players, and immediately they went in the completely opposite direction that we did on the show. And that actually is really exciting for me as a DM because I'm not running Drakkenheim, the show that I played in.
yeah.
I'm running a campaign world that we created that is already telling very different stories. And I think that was also part of the initial intention with Drakkenheim and with all the adventures that we write in the world of Drakkenheim is we don't want people who watch the show to know exactly what to expect when they're playing the game. They don't want to be like, oh, okay, so now this is the moment where we fight this monster and this outcome occurs and then we move on. Like, we wanted to create an open-ended adventure, and even in the Smuggler's Secret adventure, we wanted it open-ended enough that it's like two groups are not going to have the same adventure. It's going to be different for a lot of people.
I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of in the adventures that we've written and been able to share, because I look at it all as an invitation to play with the sandbox that we put together. Drakkenheim, in many ways, is a toolbox of different options that dungeon masters can put in front of their players, and the players get to feel like they're really in the driver's seat. And so, whenever we design an adventure in the world of Drakkenheim, and especially with Smuggler's Secrets, we try to take that big picture idea where the player's choices matter, and the dungeon master has the tools to let the players make the most interesting choices that they want to make. We try to take that in microcosm in the adventure itself. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of. And one of the things that fascinates me when I talk to dungeon masters that have run adventures using Drakkenheim is there's so many different outcomes. There's so many different ways that things go down. I always kind of have to smile because sometimes I'll speak with dungeon masters that go, I don't know why anyone would ever work with this faction or why anyone would ever make this choice. And I have to say, well, I've talked to a bunch of different groups that have made those choices and have gone down those pathways because it's a and I look at that as a mark of like how rich the world of Drakkenheim can be for different groups because people see different things in it and feel empowered to make very, very different choices. And we can kind of explore what happens when players get that ability to decide their destiny, decide their fate, decide who their friends and enemies are, and really solve problems in the way that they want to, rather than the way that the book says it has to be solved. Even with all the puzzles that we have within the adventure itself, we go into the details of like, so this is the intended solution if the players want to play by the rules, but if they want to go get some explosives and blow the wall open, that's entirely on the table. There's all sorts of ways to encourage that creativity of players thinking about things outside the box and not necessarily having to play by the intended way of doing things. And I think that that's part of what we really try to do when we write our adventures.
For those that don't know, can you, in like 1 minute or less, what is the world of Drakkenheim?
It was a low magic setting where the capital city of one of the largest nations gets struck by an eldritch meteor shower that destroys the city and contaminates it with eldritch energies. Essentially, raw magic starts seeping through the world, and this invites mutations, monsters, rifts in time and space that allow extraplanar entities access. Suddenly, our low magic setting has this epicenter of high magic that's basically spilling out into the surrounding area. Yes, this is the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to the world, but it also has invited groups of people to come and examine what is going on in the city of Drakkenheim, because not only was this the capital city and there's a lot of lost secrets, a lot of lost treasure and relics and mysteries, but also this eldritch meteor that crashed into it is one of the most powerful resources that's ever been seen in the world. And so there are several factions that are trying to decide what is best to be done with what we're calling delirium, which is the essence of this meteor. Some factions want to use it to gain power and use it to create powerful magic items. Others think that it needs to be destroyed because of how dangerous it is. Some seek to control it. Some just want to reclaim Drakkenheim and find somebody to put on the throne because they're now dealing with a shattered kingdom. All of these are at play amongst this ruined city that has all of these cool adventure sites that people can go to and crazy monsters that really tap into our love of dark fantasy and cosmic horror that we really got to instill into the world of Drakkenheim. And Smuggler's Secrets is just a small early campaign sample of what this city feels like. And part of the big challenge in the city is because it's so dangerous, even getting past the city walls has proven really difficult. And Smuggler's Secrets is about a group of people who have found a map that may suggest a secret smuggler's tunnel in the sewers that would allow them to get further into the city. And a couple of the factions really want to know if this map is legit and are willing to work with the players to gain that information.
But of course, it's dangerous in the sewers, and the factions don't want to send their own agents on what might be a waste of time and a dangerous mission. So that's where the player characters come in because the player characters are expendable at this stage. They're third level characters coming into the world of Drakkenheim, and the factions need help from adventurers to achieve their objectives and goals because all of their own resources are stretched thin. And so if the player characters can work with the factions, they could curry their favor, earning their own rewards and boons. And a big element of Drakkenheim is that the player characters have their own personal reasons to adventure in the city. Like they might be looking for a lost relic of a family member, trying to find out what happened in the city. Or maybe it turns out a player character actually might secretly be related to the royal family and trying to prove that they are. And so the players need the factions too, but it's up to them to decide which ones they trust, which ones they want to work with, which ones they want to broker alliances between, and which ones they might want to make enemies of.
That's awesome. That is the best pitch. And we have maps as well with this adventure.
We've designed a bunch of maps that are locations in the sewers. So the centerpiece of the adventure is kind of the old Smuggler's map, which is this faded out map that is before the meteor struck Drakkenheim that shows the map of the sewer system of Drakkenheim. And so the players are given that map and said, these are the places on the map that we think might be passages underneath the city walls. And then each of those locations, which the players can go to in any order, is a little mini dungeon on its own and whether or not there is a way under the walls at these locations is a mystery that the player characters might have to figure out.
One thing that I think is really awesome about this adventure is, of course, it's going to be an introduction to the world of Drakkenheim. So if people are, they haven't bought Dungeons of Drakkenheim or they haven't experienced Drakkenheim yet, this is a great and easy way to jump in and experience the world. But for those people out there who do own Dungeons of Drakkenheim or are maybe already getting ready to start their own campaigns, we never had an adventure site in the sewers in the early campaign in the actual book. So this works as sort of an addition to the Dungeons of Drakkenheim book, where if you're running a long-term Drakkenheim campaign, or mostly just getting started, because I think this one's best for earlier levels, but you can just slot this in as another possible adventure site to explore for your players if they're looking for a way into the city and they say, hey, what about the sewers? Can we use the sewers to get into the city? You can drop this as the adventure site that they get to explore.
That's fantastic. Do you have any recommendations or DM tips for those who might run this adventure?
My tip for DMs who are running anything Drakkenheim themed is you might have a favorite faction, but I think the most important thing is to figure out why each faction is right. And every time you're portraying that faction, uh, try to personify like what it is that makes that faction correct. And if you do that, the idea is that you never want the players to be 100% sure which factions they don't like and which ones they do, up until maybe the middle of the campaign or even later. I always like to say that if your players are attaching themselves to a faction, present a question from that faction that maybe is morally gray. But if the factions hate another faction, have that faction present something that actually feeds into what the players want to achieve. And suddenly you get them being like, I don't know, who do we work for? From the player's side, the best advice that I can give is that Drakkenheim is not necessarily the most balanced encounter adventure, and it is a dangerous city full of horrible monsters. And we took a lot of inspiration from some of our favorite video games, like I want to say Bloodborne, but I know there's also the Dark Souls and all of that, where if you go the wrong way in that game, you die. Like it's bad news. So running is always an option. A lot of players hate running, but sometimes running is the best choice you can make in Drakkenheim, and managing your resources is actually pretty important as well.
Yeah. In the city of Drakkenheim is a dangerous, contaminated environment, and simply being exposed to the eldritch energies of the city can cause some really scary conditions and mutations on your characters. And so, one of the things that you always have to remember in Drakkenheim is that you have to survive your way home because you can't take a long rest in the ruins of Drakkenheim due to the presence of the contaminated energy. So whenever you're on a mission in the city, you have to be always thinking, we still have to escape the city. And so if you use all your resources in a single encounter, you could get ambushed by monsters on your way out of the city, or even worse, you could be filled with treasure and all your cool things that you found in the city, and then on the city's edge, and the Queen's men or rival adventurers shake you down, and you got nothing left to fight them, and they just take everything that you found. So always think of what happens on your way out of the city too.